I always imagined this season of my life would feel like magic. The lace invitations, the soft flicker of candlelight in my bridal mood board, the endless lists that somehow made me giddy. Every call with vendors, every dress fitting, it all felt like a dream taking shape. My friends squealed over tiny details, my dad beamed with quiet pride, and Victoria, well, she was everywhere. Suggesting, nudging, hovering. I told myself she just wanted to help. I wanted to believe that. Victoria has always been intense. She swoops in with plans before anyone even asks. Fabric samples in one hand, unsolicited advice in the other. Sometimes I'd catch her laughing just a little too long at James's jokes, or brushing past him with that certain look. But I brushed it off. Maybe I didn't want to see it. I buried myself in excitement. Flowers, favors, playlists. I'd fall asleep smiling, dreaming of walking down the aisle. But sometimes I swear I felt a whisper of something colder behind all that warmth. One night, curled up on the couch with tea in hand, I grabbed James's laptop to double-check a booking. His password felt like trust, like something shared, something safe. But then I saw it. A subject line so sharp it cut the air. I missed last night. My stomach dropped. I clicked. Words I can't unsee, photos I can't unremember. Victoria. Him. Together. Hotel rooms I thought were business trips. My heart slammed against my ribs, my skin burning hot and cold all at once. I couldn't breathe. I sat there, trembling, feeling everything collapse around me. I wanted to scream, to break things, to confront them both and burn it all down. But instead, I sat very still. My tears dried fast, replaced by something stronger, something steadier. They thought they could betray me in whispers and shadows? Fine. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't run, I'd smile. I'd walk beside them, hand in hand, right up to the moment they destroyed themselves in front of everyone. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding head, but I forced myself to smile. I went through my routine, coffee, emails, seating charts, like nothing had happened. Every time I looked at James, I studied him with new eyes. How did I miss the way he pulled away when I reached for his hand? Or the hesitation in his voice when he said, "I love you." And Victoria, she still hovered, still too helpful, still playing the role of doting stepmother. I let them. I let them both believe I was blind. I started collecting pieces, screenshots, dates, reservations. Every email felt like another brick in the wall I was building, a fortress, quiet and steady. I replayed every memory, every suspicious glance they shared when they thought I wasn't looking. The puzzle pieces fit too easily, and yet I couldn't help but marvel at their arrogance. Did they really think I wouldn't find out? Or maybe they thought I'd never dare to confront them. Oh, how little they knew me. There were moments I wanted to break, moments in the shower where I let myself sob, moments alone in my car where I screamed into the silence. But then I'd wipe my face, breathe deep, and step back into the role they wrote for me, the blissfully unaware bride-to-be. And somehow pretending made me stronger. The more they believed the lie, the more control I had. Every day I rehearsed in my head how it would play out. Every day my confidence grew. But there was one thing I hadn't counted on. How lonely revenge feels when you keep it all inside. I knew I couldn't carry this weight alone much longer. And so late one night, I picked up the phone and dialed the one person I knew would stand by me, my father. His voice, warm and steady, answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart. What's wrong?" I paused, my breath catching. I was about to break his heart too, but some truths I realized deserve the light. Telling my dad was harder than I thought. The words tangled in my throat, heavy and sharp. But once they spilled out, the affair, the emails, the deceit, his silence told me everything. He didn't gasp. He didn't deny. He just sat there, breathing slowly, processing the betrayal from the woman he trusted, the woman he shared a home with. I could almost hear his heart cracking. And yet, when he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "I'm so sorry, Ella. I should have protected you." We sat together in that silence, both of us broken, both of us rebuilding. He held my hand like he used to when I was little, strong and steady. In that moment, the plan stopped being just mine. It became ours. My father, quiet, kind, always trusting, had steel in his eyes I'd never seen before. We talked through the night, not just about what they did, but about who we were before they tried to tear us down. I realized then, this wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. They tried to steal our trust, our peace, but they would not win. In the days that followed, I found a strange calm. James still kissed my forehead goodnight. Victoria still texted me about centerpieces. I answered with smiles, nods, and cheerful exclamation points. Inside, I felt like a coiled spring. Every moment was part of the buildup. Every innocent conversation, every wedding task, every loving gesture from them, all leading to the moment they'd watch their world collapse. And I would stand there, steady and unshaken, letting them feel every ounce of what they'd done. I knew the day was coming. I could almost taste it, but I also knew I couldn't rush. Timing was everything. I wanted them relaxed, overconfident, certain they'd fooled me. I wanted to watch them glow with false security, so that when the truth finally shattered their illusion, the fall would be spectacular. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted poetry. And trust me, I was only getting started. I became an actress in my own life. Every morning, I woke up and slipped into the role with ease, the glowing bride, fussing over floral arrangements and cake flavors, pretending my heart hadn't been ripped apart. James would grin, thinking he was charming me with sweet texts and whispered promises. Victoria would beam as if she hadn't stabbed us both in the back. They thought they were in control. But the real power was mine. Every smile I gave them was rehearsed. Every hug was a mask. I started documenting everything. My phone became a vault of screenshots, voice memos, even photos of hotel receipts I found hidden in his jacket pockets. I learned to read between their texts, secret codes, tiny details they never imagined I'd catch. I wasn't just building evidence. I was weaving a story that would end with gasps, with silences too heavy to fill, with their faces pale and speechless. I could see it so clearly in my mind. The stage was set. I just needed patience. The hardest part was hiding the tremble in my hands when they stood too close. James would brush my cheek, and I'd have to swallow the bile rising in my throat. Victoria would gush about how proud she was of me, her eyes sparkling with lies, and I'd nod, thanking her sweetly, wanting nothing more than to scream. But instead, I stored every moment away, like loading ammunition into a chamber, waiting for the perfect shot. At night, when the weight felt too much, I'd call my dad. He became my anchor, calm, supportive, never pushing, but always ready. He listened as I vented, as I plotted, as I doubted myself and then found my footing again. Sometimes he'd remind me with a quiet firmness, "Ella, you deserve better than silence. You deserve to be heard." His words became my mantra. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to make them both watch me rise. Every little lie they told became part of my script. I'd sit at dinner, listening to James talk about late meetings and tight deadlines, nodding along like the perfect fiancé. Victoria would chime in with her suggestions for vows or floral arrangements, her voice dripping with false warmth. I played my part so well, sometimes I wondered if I'd missed my calling on stage. But behind the smiles, my mind was racing, tracking dates, connecting dots, tightening the web around them. There was a strange satisfaction in gathering proof. The emails, the call logs, the hotel receipts, each one a nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. Sometimes, late at night, I'd scroll through them slowly, imagining their faces when it all came crashing down. My heart would pound with anticipation, my palms sweaty with adrenaline. But I never rushed. Revenge, I realized, isn't a sprint. It's a masterpiece. And I was painting every stroke with care. The weight of the secret was suffocating some days. I'd sit alone, staring at my reflection, wondering who I was becoming. But then I'd remember. I wasn't the villain here. They chose deceit. I chose clarity. And clarity meant I had to endure the discomfort, the self-doubt, the endless pretending. But I could do it. I would do it. Every time James kissed me goodnight, every time Victoria hugged me tightly, I whispered inside, "Soon, you'll see." My dad never asked for details unless I offered. He just listened. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was strength. He let me feel in control, but reminded me I wasn't alone. Some nights we'd sit in his kitchen, just the two of us, sipping coffee in silence. He'd reach over, squeeze my hand, and that simple gesture said everything. We were in this together, and when the curtain finally lifted, neither of us would flinch. The days blurred into a quiet performance. Bridal showers, cake tastings, dress fittings, each one a scene where I smiled, laughed, posed for photos, all while plotting. James would wrap his arm around me in front of family, kissing my temple like the devoted partner he pretended to be. Inside, I burned, but I never let it show. Victoria, always hovering, always offering help, never once suspected that the girl she thought she controlled was slipping the strings from her fingers. I learned to observe in ways I never had before. Their stolen glances when they thought no one was watching, the slight tension in their voices when I entered a room, it all told a story. My story. One they would never get to rewrite. The more evidence I gathered, the calmer I became. There was power in silence, in control. Every click of my phone camera, every screenshot saved to a hidden folder, felt like taking back a piece of myself they tried to shatter. One evening, as Victoria rambled on about centerpiece options over wine, I caught her eye and smiled. A real, steady smile. I saw her hesitate for just a second, a flicker of uncertainty. Good. I wanted that seed of doubt to grow. I wanted her to feel it in her bones that something was coming, but not know what or when. Control isn't loud, it's quiet, deliberate, precise. And I had never felt stronger than I did in that silence. The date on the calendar crept closer. I circled it in red, not for the wedding, but for the reveal. Every time I glanced at it, my heart raced. I could almost hear the hush that would fall over that room, the gasps, the shifting feet. But I didn't want to just expose them. I wanted to make them question every moment, every smile I'd given them leading up to it. I wanted them to realize too late, I had been playing along the entire time. The morning of the wedding felt surreal. I woke up before dawn, the sky still heavy and dark, and sat at the edge of my bed, listening to my heartbeat. Today was the day. Not the day they thought it would be. No fairy tale, no happy ending. But the day they'd finally face themselves. My dress hung by the window, delicate lace and silk catching the first light of morning. It was beautiful. But it wasn't for him. It was my armor. Victoria arrived early, of course. She fluttered around like a queen bee, barking orders, adjusting details that didn't need adjusting. Her voice grated on me, but I stayed calm. She kissed my cheek, her perfume thick and suffocating. "I'm so proud of you, darling," she whispered. I almost laughed. Proud of what? Of how well I'd learned to wear a mask? I hugged her back and felt nothing, just cold determination. Today she'd meet the real me. The venue sparkled with perfection. Rows of white chairs, soft music in the background, guests milling about with champagne in hand. I walked through it all like a ghost, nodding, smiling, letting the weight of everyone's expectations rest on my shoulders, just for a little while longer. James looked nervous when he saw me. Good. He fiddled with his cufflinks, glanced away too quickly. I could almost taste his fear. He thought it was wedding day jitters. He had no idea. As I stood in the bridal suite, staring at myself in the mirror, I felt strangely at peace. The chaos was swirling around me. Laughter, footsteps, distant chatter, but inside there was silence. I touched the lace on my gown, ran my fingers along the veil, and took a deep breath. This wasn't a moment for tears. This was the final scene I had been writing for months. And when I stepped out of that room, the world they built on lies would crumble right beneath their feet. The music swelled as I took my father's arm. He looked at me, his eyes soft but steady, and I knew we were both ready. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His hand squeezed mine gently, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. The doors opened, and there they all were. Family, friends, smiling faces filled with expectation. My heart didn't race. Instead, it slowed, every beat measured and calm. I took my first step forward. James waited at the end of the aisle, his smile tight, eyes darting between me and the guests. He looked pale. Victoria sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the doting stepmother to perfection. I walked slowly, purposefully, each step echoing in my mind like a drumbeat. This wasn't a walk toward a promise, it was a march toward justice. And with each step, I felt the weight of their lies grow heavier in the room. I could feel their eyes on me, searching for emotion, but all they found was serenity. That smile on my face wasn't nervous joy. It was knowing. It was control. James shifted from foot to foot, his hands clenching, unclenching. I wondered if he felt it yet, that something wasn't right. Victoria sat straighter, her smile faltering for just a second. I met her gaze, held it, watched her confidence flicker. Let her sit in that discomfort. When I reached the altar, James took my hand. It was clammy. I squeezed it gently, almost kindly. The officiant welcomed everyone, but I barely heard him. My heart beat slow and steady. And then, before he could continue, I let go of James's hand and took a small step forward. I turned to face the room, my voice clear and warm as I spoke. Before I say I do, there's something I'd like to share with all of you. The room fell silent. You could hear the rustle of silk, the soft shifting of bodies as people turned to look at me. James's face froze, his smile faltering as confusion flashed across his eyes. Victoria straightened in her seat, her hand still clutching that ridiculous handkerchief. I felt the weight of 100 eyes, but I didn't flinch. I took another breath, calm and steady, and gestured to the back of the room. Curtains slid open, and 2 large screens blinked to life. Gasps filled the air before the first message even finished scrolling. Lines of text, intimate, undeniable, ugly, played out for all to see. Emails, hotel confirmations, photos, words they thought would stay hidden. The room went cold. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God," behind me. James's breathing quickened. I could feel the panic radiating from him like heat. Victoria's face turned a shade I didn't know was possible, somewhere between ash and crimson. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I turned slowly to James, meeting his wide, pleading eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Then I looked at Victoria, her lips parted, frozen in shock. She looked small, suddenly, stripped of her power, her lies naked in front of everyone. I turned back to the guests, my voice soft but steady. I thought this day was about promises, but some promises were already broken. I could feel their attention sharpen, leaning in, bracing for more. And just before I gave them more, I let the silence hang, heavy and deliberate. James whispered my name, his voice cracked and desperate. I didn't turn to him. Instead, I looked at my father, standing tall at the end of the aisle, and nodded. He stepped forward, taking the microphone with a calm I admired. "There's something you all deserve to know," he began, his voice clear, steady, and full of purpose. And with that, I knew. The real show had only just begun. I stepped back and watched my father take the stage, not as the man who raised me quietly, but as someone who had finally found his voice. He held the microphone like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. The room was frozen, breaths held tight, champagne glasses untouched. He looked at Victoria, his eyes hard, unflinching. "I wasn't the only one betrayed," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like glass. "Ella, I think they deserve to hear it from you too." My throat tightened, but I nodded. My hands didn't shake. I turned to Victoria, and for the first time I truly saw her. Not the polished, perfect woman she pretended to be, but the manipulator beneath. "Dad," I began, my voice soft but deliberate. "You weren't the only one she lied to. I found out weeks ago. I wanted you to know that we've both been played, and it ends today." Gasps rippled through the crowd again, whispers like waves crashing on a beach. Victoria's face crumpled, her mask cracking right there in front of everyone. She tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came. James grabbed my arm, his voice frantic. "Ella, please, please, not like this." I pulled away slowly, looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time I felt nothing for him. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. He made his choices, and now he would live in the wreckage. My father took a breath, steadier than I'd ever seen him. "The papers were filed 3 days ago," he announced, his voice filled with quiet dignity. "Victoria, I'm divorcing you, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deeper than any scream. Guests shifted, uncomfortable, unsure where to look. Victoria crumbled into her seat, her hands trembling. And in that silence, I felt weightless. I hadn't lost anything. I'd let go of what I never needed. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, like we were all underwater, suspended between shock and comprehension. I looked out over the sea of faces, some wide-eyed, some covering their mouths, some shaking their heads in disbelief. But not a single person turned away. People crave truth, even when it burns. And here it was, raw and unforgiving, laid bare for everyone to see. I took one slow breath and spoke again. "Since there's no wedding today," my voice softened, almost warm, "I'd like to invite you all to something else." Murmurs swirled. James stared at me, his eyes pleading, glassy with panic. Victoria sat slumped, defeated, mascara streaking down her face. But I wasn't here to destroy them and leave ashes. I was here to build something out of what they tried to ruin. "Let's turn this day into a celebration anyway," I continued. "A celebration of truth, of fresh starts, of honesty, even when it hurts." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. I could see it on their faces. Admiration, maybe even a little awe. This wasn't the public breakdown they had expected. This was control, grace, strength. James tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. I turned to him one last time, my voice soft but firm. "You and Victoria are no longer welcome here." His mouth fell open, but I'd already turned away. My father stepped beside me, solid and unwavering. The staff moved without question. 2 security guards gently escorted Victoria and James toward the exit. She resisted for a moment, twisting in panic, whispering frantic apologies to my father, to me, to anyone who would listen. But no one did. James walked stiffly, his face ashen, broken. The doors closed behind them with a quiet click, and just like that, the weight lifted. The room exhaled. I smiled, finally free, and raised my glass. I raised my glass slowly, letting the moment settle. The guests followed, uncertain at first, then one by one, glasses lifted. I could see it in their eyes. Sympathy, respect, maybe even inspiration. I hadn't just saved myself from humiliation. I'd reclaimed the narrative. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice clear, steady, warm. My father clinked his glass gently against mine, his smile small but proud. The room responded with quiet applause that grew, rippling into something louder, stronger. Music began to play softly again. The staff, bless them, moved seamlessly, shifting from ceremony to celebration without missing a beat. Plates were served, champagne flowed, and laughter returned, tentative at first, but then genuine. People approached me with soft words and hugs, some with tears in their eyes, telling me I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt clean. Like I'd finally scraped off something that had been clinging to me for far too long. At one point, I stepped out onto the terrace, breathing in the cool evening air. The city lights sparkled below, distant and indifferent, and for the first time in weeks, I felt weightless. My father joined me quietly. We stood there, side by side, without speaking. His hand found mine again, that same quiet strength I'd clung to, and for a moment, I let myself rest in it. The storm had passed, but deep down, I knew something else was still waiting on the horizon. I could feel it. Some stories don't end with a perfect bow. They twist, they circle back, they surprise you when you least expect it. I didn't know what was coming next, but I was finally ready for it. Somewhere out there, beyond the noise, beyond the wreckage, was something unexpected. And I had a feeling it might be exactly what I needed. In the days that followed, I thought the story would quietly fade, but it didn't. A guest had recorded the entire reveal, and by the end of the week, the video had gone viral. My inbox flooded with messages, women from around the world thanking me, telling me their own stories of betrayal, calling me brave, calling me strong. I didn't feel like either. I just felt honest. And maybe that's what resonated. I hadn't hidden. I hadn't broken. I had stood tall and told the truth. James and Victoria vanished from our social circles almost overnight. Friends stopped calling them. Invitations stopped arriving. James tried reaching out once, a long email filled with apologies and excuses. I didn't reply. He chose his path. Victoria, from what I heard, lost everything: her marriage, her friends, her carefully built image. But I didn't waste time thinking about their downfall. I had no interest in bitterness. I was already building something new, something mine. It started with interviews, then podcasts, then publishers knocking on my door. Women wanted to hear from me, not because I was scandalous, but because I was raw and real. I shared my story on stages I never imagined standing on, looking out at faces filled with hope and hurt. I told them what I had learned, that betrayal doesn't define you, that the silence they try to force on you can be broken, that standing up, even when you're shaking, changes everything. One night, after a talk in Chicago, I sat behind a table signing books. The line moved slowly, women pressing my hand, sharing pieces of themselves in hurried whispers. And then he appeared, a tall man with kind eyes and a quiet smile. He slid a copy of my book toward me and said softly, "Victoria cheated on me too, years ago." I looked up, startled, and he smiled. "I guess we both survived her." He hesitated. "Maybe. We both deserve someone better. Starting with coffee?" I blinked, caught off guard in the best way. For a moment, I forgot the cameras, the signatures, the endless questions. It was just me and this stranger, someone who had lived a different version of my story, carrying wounds that mirrored mine. I could see it in his eyes, the weight of betrayal, the quiet resilience. But beneath that, there was softness, an openness I hadn't seen in a long time. "Coffee sounds nice," I heard myself say, almost shyly. He chuckled, warm and genuine, and slipped a small card across the table. "No pressure, but maybe we both deserve something good for once." His words settled in my chest like warmth after a long winter. I watched him walk away, my heart fluttering, not with fear, not with doubt, but with possibility. Funny how life works. Just when you think you've closed every door, a new one cracks open, unexpected and quiet, waiting for you to notice. I finished the signing, but my mind wasn't on the books or the cameras anymore. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, card in hand, staring at the neatly printed name and number. I thought about everything that had led me here: the pain, the humiliation, the strength I never knew I had. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a tragedy anymore. It felt like a beginning I never planned for, but maybe always needed. I smiled to myself, slipping the card into my purse. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight, I allowed myself to exhale, to sit in the quiet with a heart that felt lighter than it had in months. Somewhere out there, someone else understood exactly how betrayal feels. And maybe, just maybe, they also knew how beautiful it was to heal. I had no idea where this path would lead, but for the first time, I was excited to find out. A few days later, I found myself sitting across from him in a cozy cafe tucked away on a quiet street. The smell of freshly ground coffee beans wrapped around us like comfort. We talked for hours, about Victoria, about trust, about the strange ways life stitches together broken pieces. He listened without interrupting, without rushing to fill the silence. And when I shared moments I hadn't even told the press, he didn't flinch. He just nodded, like he knew exactly how it felt to stand on shattered ground and rebuild. There was something effortless about it. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people who had been burned and somehow found warmth in each other's company. His laughter was soft, sincere, like he hadn't forgotten how. Mine came a little more hesitantly, but it was there. Between sips of coffee and stories of mistakes and lessons learned, I felt a piece of myself returning. The part that believed in connection, in kindness, in starting over. When we stepped out into the cool evening, he turned to me with that same quiet smile. "You deserve happiness too, you know," he said gently. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but relief. For so long, I'd been holding my breath, bracing for disappointment. But here, in this simple moment, I exhaled. Maybe life wasn't about perfect plans. Maybe it was about resilience and surprises that make your heart flutter when you least expect them. We said goodnight with no promises, just a soft understanding. I walked back to my car, the night air crisp, my heart strangely light. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had turned betrayal into strength, silence into a story, and pain into purpose. And as I drove away, I realized something simple and beautiful. Sometimes the best endings are the ones you never saw coming.